They ready in the back?
Oh, yeah.
Should be. Okay. All right. I'd like to call the Monday, January 6, 2020 meeting to order for the Ordinance Review Committee. First thing on the agenda tonight is the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody can please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, just wanted to point out real quick, Dave Enos and Jared are both not here tonight. Next thing on the agenda is a citizens open forum. Anybody wishing to speak from the audience has up to 5 minutes to do so. Anybody out there that wants to speak? Seeing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. Agenda item number 1 is approve the minutes as dated December 2nd, 2019. Do we have anyone that would like to submit a motion to do so?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Number 2 on the agenda is discuss Chapter 14 Civic and Cultural Affairs with ORC lead member Pamela Settle. Take it away.
Okay, so incorporated the discussion items from the last meeting. And so I've submitted this, and I left in the highlighting so that we could continue to see the new language, since there's new language that was added. But the items, just of note, the annual public art and design plan, I left that in and incorporated citizen review committee into that paragraph, which is under definitions, the first item under definitions, annual public art. So what's different there would just be that the city staff would put together the plan as part of the budget process and include a public art citizen review committee in that process. I didn't add any particulars as to how that would happen. Leave that up to, to staff. They already sort of have a process. But we were eliminating all of the language about having a cultural affairs department and a committee. And so to avoid having that just completely eliminated, I put it in the definition, so it allows for that to happen without there being any specific steps as to what that might look like. Leave that up to staff and the city council to decide how they want to coordinate having a committee. So I put the language there. I eliminated the section for there to be a master plan, took that out as we discussed, and then took out items 4 and 5 under the establishment of the Public Art Fund, so eliminated that. And then on the last section, under ownership and maintenance, added the language for maintenance in both numbers 1 and 3, using the same language for both. So ownership belongs to the city, and then the city would be responsible for maintenance and upkeep as determined by the city. And then in number 3, for the private construction, that the property owner retains the art, but then the property owner is then responsible for required maintenance and upkeep. And then I added as determined by the city under that one as well, so that if there is a review committee or the city commission were to determine that a piece of public art needed some maintenance, that it would be up to the city to tell that private owner that this item needs maintenance.
Yeah,
So I left that language exactly the same, so the process would be the same for public art, whether it's on public property or on private property. So that was requested that we add that maintenance language in, and that was how I chose to word that.
Previously, the title had maintenance in it, but had no
Said
reference.
ownership and maintenance, but no reference to maintenance, exactly.
Okay.
So those were the changes from the last time.
So has this already all been formatted and reviewed by Mr. Trask, or, okay, so
No,
this is
we're
just
at that
still-
point now to
Okay, so-
hand it over.
And say,
Yeah,
he reviews it and gets it ready for presentation to
Yes.
the council. Okay.
yes. The ordinance numbers that are in parentheses, like after intent and definitions, all of those references, those are from the existing ordinance. I didn't change or add those. I wasn't sure what they were referring to, so that will need to be cross-checked by the legal team.
Okay.
Tom, is there anything specific we need to do if we're going to recommend the Public Art Citizen Review Committee to be formed? Instead of just leaving it in the definition, is there some special notation we have to present to council to make sure they know that it's in there?
So the answer is yes. And when you do your report at the very end, there are recommendations as to changes in the code, which you're doing now, but there could also be recommendations for things other than additions or deletions in the code. For example, we would suggest you change the charter, these particular provisions, and we would suggest another committee to be created. And so those would be recommendations we'd add on at the back end of the report. So we need to keep a running list of those,
Okay.
but that would be where we would do it.
It'd be kind of like an addendum of discussion points or additional recommendations that aren't specific to ordinances themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right, and as a reminder, the original ordinance had an actual cultural affairs department that no longer exists, and that department had a citizen review committee as part of that department. Well, the department's gone, the committee's gone.
Right.
So we've taken that out, but I know that the assistant city manager has a process of sort of appointing a committee of people to review public art. So that may not need to change, but at least it's in here that there would be a process for having some type of a committee to approve the public art.
Yeah, and we had discussed that, seeing if we could get one formed, because I think we all saw that in our first review of this chapter, that it was in there, and does it even exist anymore? And found out that it didn't.
Well, right, we kind of knew some of the story, but didn't know, we don't know all the details still
Sure.
even now, but understanding that it makes sense that there may be reason to bring it back,
Yeah.
since maybe the past has been forgotten.
Forward.
Exactly.
Right.
Does anybody else have any commentary on it, or are we happy with as it's presented now?
I'm good.
Good.
Good. Pam put in a lot of work on that.
I know.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, awesome job.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, then we will move to agenda item number 3, discuss chapter 1, general provisions with ORC lead member Ken Sidorowicz.
So this, I guess we should have done first. This is all of our legal terms, a lot of definitions. Unless Mr. Tom has rewritten any of this, it seems, it seems like it should stand. I have a few questions just for clarification. Being from New Jersey, it's a little, some of them are a little, for instance, on the first page, Tom, under computation of time, could you possibly put that in English?
Let me just read it real quick.
Okay.
Okay, what this is saying is that if there's a requirement for something to happen, let's just say within 30 days, and we want to know when that 30 days begins and ends, if it's January 6th is when the start is going to be, we don't count that day. So we start on January 7th and we run it 30 days. We will count the last day, number 30, but we won't count today as the starting point. So that's telling us that we don't count the time of the actual act. So it doesn't really come into play a whole lot. It's more or less for our protection, for arguments to be made, that something hasn't been timely, but that's basically what it means. And and by the way, this is just like it is in the rules of civil procedure that govern cases in the court system here in Florida. We don't count the first day, we count the following day and then continue on for the number of
Because the
days.
first day could start at different times, is that what it, 10 a.m. or 4 p.m. or?
Yeah, so this doesn't deal with an actual start time, it's a start day.
Okay,
Um,
okay, thank you.
So, and the other thing is that if the last day ends on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a legal holiday, we don't count that, we go to the next business day.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you, Tom.
sure.
Okay, on the next page, under joint authority, just for edification, could you give me an example of that? All words giving a joint authority to 3 or more persons, et cetera, et cetera.
Where are you at?
Under second page, joint authority, the definition.
So if it gave joint authority to a particular committee or board, it would be a majority of that committee or board. So I think that that's where that's going.
So it's like 3 of us could count as something like that if we were or 4 out of 7, something like that.
So here it says, if the authority is given to 3 or more persons, so you've got 7 on this board, so that would mean this board, for example, and then so long as there's a majority of you, the majority, which would be 4, would have the rights to do whatever is being discussed in that joint authority provision in the code.
Okay, so tonight's a perfect example then. Okay, okay,
Right, we
thank you.
just barely got there.
Okay. And then down a couple there, I guess it's close to the same thing. An example where it says number, a word importing the singular number only.
A word importing the singular number only may extend and be applied to several persons and things as well as one person and thing. I don't have an example of that.
Just seems vague. Just seemed vague, Tom, that's all.
I don't think I've ever used these definitions before, because normally the definitions that we use that come into play a lot is in the land development code, but these are here for the ordinance portion of the code and not the land development code.
And down a couple more where it says person. The word person shall extend and be applied to associations, firms, partnerships, and bodies, politic and corporate, as well as to individuals. Why aren't those specific terms used, or is that just a umbrella type?
It is an umbrella type definition, and it's basically allowing the use of this single word throughout the code where you don't have to specify any person, association, firm, partnership, bodies, politic, and corporation, and whatever the code provision is, you can just say person.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's what we do also in court, in the civil rules of procedure, and in the statutes when we're serving someone, for example. It's always the use of the word person.
Okay, thank you. Down again towards the bottom of this page where it says state, this would be my only suggestion, and I don't want this to open a can of worms, but when it says the words quote-unquote state with a small s, should that be a capital S to differentiate between someone stating something?
The correct answer is that it should be a capital S.
Could
And
that
that's the
just
way-
be a typo thing, Ann? I mean, without that being submitted to the city council, or is it that important, Tom?
No, it is important to correct the typographical errors. So I mean, we can notify the codifier of the code book and advise them, but I would be careful to make sure that we reviewed the entire code book to make sure that the word state and with a small s was not used differently than state with a capital S. So whatever direction you want to give us is where we'll go with that. But I would want to make sure that if we do correct it, we make sure the rest of the code addresses it as well.
What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I mean, it brings up a valid point because, if there are uses of that word state,
As
not
talking-
relating to the state of Florida, but based on this master lead-in definition of what you're supposed to interpret state as, then, yeah. I think there's some validity to that. It's just a matter of, you gotta go and do a Control F through all your documents and find the word state. And hopefully,
That was
as
the
Tom
only-
was saying, there's not too many instances of where it's not alluding to the state of Florida, then it makes the work not all so bad, I guess, versus if you'd have to go in there and.
That's the only glaring
Right.
spot that I saw in the pages here. So what should we do about that, Tom? Do we,
So I'm going to put it in here as something that needs to be corrected.
okay,
So we'll double check the rest of the code.
all right, and these are just, again, a couple of questions or observations, just going along where it says written or in writing, and it gives a bunch of representation of words, letters, or figures, whether by printing, duplicating, handwriting, or otherwise. What would otherwise be? Would that be on a phone or something, or an email? Yeah, something electronic?
Yeah, anything that's written.
On a device, let's say, or,
Yeah. Facsimile, if people still use those, and email.
yes, they do. Okay, so moving along to section 1-10, and I think this sets out the procedure after our recommendations to city council. And I think it also, especially like in B, it answers some of Pam's numbering questions that she had, where they're eliminated or moved around, et cetera, et cetera. Just an observation there. And finally, my last observation was section 113 probably on the last page, section 113. I just noticed, probably not a big deal, Tom, but the reversal of sections, paragraphs, sentences, clause, and phrases are reversed in the next couple listings of them. I guess that's not a big deal, but they just go in reverse order. Is that the preference of the writer, or?
Yeah, it must have been.
Okay. Probably.
As long as they're all in there, we're going to be good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably no legal issue.
It's interesting. Yeah.
I did have one question on this, Tom. In the definitions under owner, I'm sorry, Ken, were you?
Yeah.
I apologize, sorry about that. They spell out all the different types of tenancies, but they also say part owner, joint owner, and then is there a reason that was done? And I'm just asking for my own thing, because I was going, well, do we have to put life tenant in there? Do we have to be more specific as to the different types of tenancies that are listed because they're already specific? Or is it just sort of whoever?
The idea was to include just about any type of ownership interest.
Yeah, and I thought the catch-all there was, or any part owner, joint owner, then it goes into the tenant, common tenant, partnership, joint tenant, and I was like, okay, well, say a life tenant came in, which I'm sure exists here in Pinellas County and in Oldsmar, a life tenant comes in with a remainderman, and not that it would just be down to semantics, and I don't think anybody would argue about their ownership interest, but it just wasn't there. And so I didn't know if there was going to be major changes in this. I was going to say, let's change that too. If the only minor change that we're gonna make is the appropriate change to the state. I just thought it'd be something else we might want to discuss, only because it's there, to be changed if necessary. I didn't think it was the only change that was, if it was going to be the only change, I wouldn't have recommended it.
So just to tell you what is really being discussed here is that there is an ownership interest, what we call a life estate. A life estate is where someone has the right to live there, but upon their death, they obviously will no longer have an interest in it, but there is always someone who has a remainder interest in it when the life estate is going on. So the person who has a life estate has a responsibility to what we call the remainder man. But this is the situations where usually you have divorcing people or elderly people that want to provide for their spouse when they pass away, but they want to make sure that when that second person passes away, that they no longer have a legal interest in the property. It goes to whoever else is the beneficiary. So it just gives them a right to stay in that home and stay in that property while they're living. That's what Steve is talking about.
Okay.
So my suggestion is let's add that life estate language under the definition of owner to cover that problem.
Okay. Do you guys all understand that?
Yep.
That's all I have in.
I had something under, in real property, the words real property shall include lands, tenements, and hereditaments. I don't even know what that last
I have
word
that
is.
underlined, actually.
Hereditary something?
Hereditaments.
I don't know what that word is.
I don't got it either.
So what I can do is I can provide you with Black's Law Dictionary definition of it the next time around. I've never used the term before, unless you want, we can look it up right now.
I just didn't know if we should change that to something that people know what it is.
Yeah, that needs its own
But there's
definition
some
in this list.
Right, exactly. yeah.
It is legalese.
I did.
So even Tom doesn't know what it means.
We got him.
Yeah, you got me.
I don't feel so dumb now.
Says any item of property, either corporal, such as land or building, or an incorporeal hereditant, such as rent or as a rent or a right of way. So it's basically trying to pick up anything, any other little tiny legal interest in a property. And then underneath that, it says an item of inheritance.
Right.
Interesting.
Right of way, rents, anything that related to real property.
All right.
I picked up on one thing here that kind of ties into some of the discussion that we had in previous meetings about when we would say, I think it was the section that you covered, Steve, with he, and then we would say him or her, or he or she.
Yeah, I saw that
And with
too.
gender there, it's kind of this master thing that says he means can't apply to women or any other entity.
Right.
So I don't know if because of that definition, do we need to do that? Or do we get rid of this definition because we are using both gender pronouns, but then it still doesn't necessarily cover legal entities that are not of a physical person.
Right.
So I just wanted to point that out because I don't know if it's worth going and adding in all the she's when that's there, that's
That's
a separate
typical
discussion.
But that's typical grammar too. I
We
mean,
did
that's,
tweak that in the city charter years ago about referring to the mayor as he. And I don't know how Tom tweaked it, but it was approved by the voters and
Okay.
everything. That was pointed out before, yeah.
Yeah, because even in the peddlers section, it says salesman. I had called that out too. But then when I read this, I thought, oh, okay, well, I guess it's okay.
I figured this kind of blanketed,
Yeah.
Sure.
although,
yeah.
there would be probably differing opinions about.
You're in college now, you can't use that pronoun.
Yeah,
Right. So I mean, Tom, I don't know what you think on that as far as where in the previous reports that we may have discussed, as far as the adding of he/she, I think is what we may have agreed upon prior to seeing this.
So when we get the report ready to be finalized, we can bring that back to you, and if you decide that because there's only that one little change in that one section, you may not want to do it because of the cost and expense, and because it's otherwise covered here under this definition of gender.
Okay,
Right.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Does anybody else have anything?
I just had, let's see, number 7 I had written down here, let's see here. I was just wondering if therefore was spelled wrong or not. Under
Section
Section-
1.7?
it's 1-9, actually, 1-9, item number 7. Any ordinance providing for local improvements and assessing taxes, therefore, I didn't know if that was, therefore, it needed E at the end, or if that's a different use.
It's
for
used both
this.
ways, whatever you'd prefer, but it's used both ways with the E or without the E.
Oh,
It's going to have the same meaning.
Okay.
Okay.
it looks sharp with the semicolon there.
All right. In that case, are we ready to move on from here? Okay. So, then, next on our agenda is item number 4. Discuss Chapter 22 elections, ORC lead member Jared Buckman, who's not here. And you have some notes that you gave us. Do we want to just read through this aloud, or just say that we're kind of submitting it as is, or with anybody else's discussion from that section?
And that's up to you guys.
Okay.
I just, when he found out that he wasn't gonna be able to be here and asked what to do, I said, well, one thing you could do is go ahead and email me the changes that you did, and then I provided for you.
Okay.
But I don't know how you wanna proceed. I mean, I can fill in some of the stuff that I told him when I came to the election one. If you have
Right.
questions on it.
Well, kind of like reading through the top there, it more or less kind of states that we may want to hold off and see what happens in March before, like, digging in and addressing this further. Is that the case, or?
Right, so there's a section in there about what happens when a candidate for office results in a vacancy in the candidacy, and then what happens? Well, a vacancy in the candidacy, if it's going to result in a vacancy on the council, which is what would happen, then it says there needs to be a special election within a certain time. And it really doesn't make sense, because the time frame it gives, there's no way you could have an election within that time frame.
No.
But also, if there is a vacant seat on the council, there's already directions on how to handle that in the charter. Now, there is some language that was erroneously deleted that also handles what to do if there's a vacancy, which is that the council would have to appoint somebody in 30 days. And the voters will be voting on whether or not to add that in at this election. So yes, that's the question. Do you want to see how that election results or do you want to just say, hey, if there's a vacancy in the candidacy, check out the charter, see the charter for directions on how to fill that vacancy that would be resulting on council.
Okay.
My suggestion to you, since it's one page, that you put it off until later in your review process.
Right.
Let the election take place. It's not gonna take a whole lot of effort to come back to this, since it's only basically one page in the code book. That would be my suggestion, and then it would also give Jared the opportunity to present his thoughts on what he was thinking, in case there's something reading that he wanted to accomplish that we can't read between the lines on.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, because especially since he's already taken a look at it too, it'll be easier to kind of circle back around after March 17th, once we know those results have been verified, that then, okay, what were those results, and then how does that tie back into with what we needed to discuss on this ordinance? So if everybody's all right with that, we'll just table this until
April meeting.
the April meeting? Okay, so we'll make sure we get that on the April agenda for a second review. Okay, With that, then we will move on to agenda item number 5, discuss chapter 46, peddlers and solicitors with ORC lead member Steve Graber.
Thank you. I didn't have much on this one, and I spoke with city staff, and they didn't have any specific changes except one thing, and it's section 46-4, hours of operation. I talked to, I can't count the amount of people where I just said, hey, when can somebody knock on your door, and when is it too early, when's it too late? And I didn't tell them the times. I just said, when is it too early, when's it too late? And then I said, well, you can do it from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And their heads exploded. 9 p.m. is way too late and 8 a.m. is way too early, especially on a Saturday morning. Some of the suggestions that I got were, it just didn't seem feasible because you have to allow folks to sell their wares. So, something like 10 to 5 wouldn't work because nobody's home from work. But if somebody shows up at your house on a Tuesday night, and especially in the case of me, where my kids are sleeping and they knock on my door at 8:35, that's not going to work for me either. So my suggested change, and it's absolutely open for discussion, would be to change those hours from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. to 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Cut an hour off the front and 2 hours off the back. Still allow time for when folks get off of work, but before everybody's starting to basically wind down and end their days. That seems kind of, it wasn't universal in the conversations I had with coworkers and whoever would listen to me, to be quite honest. But ultimately, a lot of what people said is, I don't want anybody knocking on my door ever. And I said, well, that's not really the point of the exercise. The people who don't have no soliciting signs on their doors, or or if somebody's coming in the neighborhood in violation of that, but people who don't mind, when are those hours going to be okay? So like I said, my suggestion is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. If there's other suggestions, of course, I'd love to hear them. I just thought that was the most reasonable given the hours that are there now.
You're also eliminating the restriction on Sundays, correct?
No, I'm keeping the restriction
are?
on Sundays. In my own mind, I just, and that's
Just reading your little box over here.
oh, I didn't.
Yeah, I think you just meant it just for the hours, right? Not
Yeah, just
necessarily for the days.
Yeah, I didn't, and I didn't address it. Thanks, Ken. I didn't address Sundays in the box there. It was just when they're already allowed to do it. Keeping the Sunday restriction, I thought was fine and completely reasonable. Especially if you showed up at somebody's house at 8 a.m. on a Sunday, I think you'd be in for some trouble. But I know in my neighborhood they wanted this addressed. They didn't want to do, and we had a discussion the last time that we met about the dusk till dawn thing. I didn't think that would work either, because then folks could show up in the summer later during the hours, and they'd run out of time during the winter. So like I said, 9 to 7 I thought was reasonable. 10 to 6, I think you cut off when people are getting home from work. But even if you show up at 10 till 8 at night, I still think that's too late. I think people are watching Jeopardy and going to bed pretty soon. I just think that's what's going on.
9 to 7 seems reasonable, yeah.
Okay.
Well, right.
But actually read 7 p.m. to 9.
That's right, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m.
And even by 7 in the winter, it's dark.
dark already,
And
yeah.
no
yeah.
one's really gonna open the door if they're not
Right.
expecting someone at 6:30 on a weeknight in January.
Right, no, absolutely, yeah. But it's still difficult to enforce that. I just, if you show up at 8:01 a.m. and you show up at 8:59 p.m., it's way too early and way too late, and everybody I discussed it with was in agreement with that. It was harnessing the hours down to where, okay, these folks still have an opportunity to sell. We're not eliminating that, but we're making them a little bit more burdensome on them, only because you can't just show up whenever you want to. Other than that, I had no suggested changes unless, and I know that Paula said, we saw the salesman thing.
Salesman, yeah.
Of course, that's up for discussion, but if we don't change the definition on the front end, do we have to change it here? If anybody else saw something that I didn't, please let me know.
Does anybody have any additional notes or commentary?
Okay. I think the 7 PM to 9 AM is good.
Okay. Does everybody like consensus on those hours?
Yeah, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. probably wouldn't work.
That's, and I kept hearing that, and it was so funny, because it was a fun discussion, because like I said, I didn't give them what the hours already were. It was just, hey, when's it too early to knock on your door, when's it too late, and just to get honest reactions. And of course, like I said, the visceral reaction was, no one's allowed to knock on my door ever unless it's Amazon or the postman, which was funny, but I was like, no, honestly, like when is it too early, when's it too late?
That
And
would be postal person.
post person, that's right. Yes,
You can't say postman.
I understand. Forgive me.
Sorry.
But yeah, I think 10 to 2 wouldn't, that'd be a pretty tight run. They'd be running around the neighborhood knocking on doors, I think.
But in our neighborhood, like a lot of neighborhoods, HOAs, you're not supposed to solicit at all.
Right,
Dan's always kicking people out.
yeah, tell them to get out, yeah. Yeah,
So just as a person who has people at my door all the time, I didn't know they had to have a permit. So do they have to ever show the permit? Like, does it have to be visible? If they're coming to your door to sell you a roof or cut your trees down, or,
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, we have people stopping constantly, and I bet they don't have a permit.
Oh.
yeah, I mean, I guess it's just more education on reporting those violations to make sure they don't do it anymore.
But now at least we're educated, you can say.
Yeah, where
Do
let
you
me
have a
see your permit,
Yeah,
pal.
because that was another part of the discussion came up was, how do you educate people? And how do you let them know, like, this isn't all right? You can just get mad at people and say, hey, you're here too late. But unless you take steps to report the violation, that's not going to change.
Well, with the permit too, it refers off then to the land development code, which, Tom, do you have any, off the top of your head, how that ties back in with this permit required? 'Cause obviously, I'm sure we've got people going around with no permit, so is it really
Yeah,
any
what about
peddler or?
what about the kids selling Girl Scout cookies or candy
Right.
bars for their softball team? Because you've got kids in the neighborhood that are going door to door.
Right.
Sure.
What's the definition of peddler?
So to answer your question, I'm not sure what the land development code is. We can pull the code and take a look at it right now, though, while we're here. I've got the code book. But I thought that there was an exception.
Oh, peddler,
Or,
transient, merchant, solicitor, itinerant salesman, all persons who engage in house-to-house or street-to-street solicitation for the sale of any book, magazine, ware, merchandise, service, or other real or personal property within the corporate limits of the city, whether or not the individual has, carries, or exposes for sale a sample. Peddler includes any transient merchant, solicitor, salesman.
Yes, that would be Girl Scout cookies. that'd be
Merchandise would be
everything.
covered, yeah, I guess cookies would be covered under merchandise.
Well, to throw them in jail. Girl Scout.
The season is upon us too.
It is.
I got the email the first day back in January. Cookie
Cookie
season,
time,
and cookie
yeah.
season is here. I don't think we want to be locking up the Girl Scouts.
That's right, right.
I grabbed the code book. I'm going to tell you.
Do we assume that any hour restrictions are disseminated when somebody applies for a permit?
Well, we should know, but I don't know the answer to the question, yeah.
I guess we're assuming that.
And where do they get the permit?
I wonder if it's somehow tied to the key of engaging in business and then that tying with the land development code or something. But it does raise questions. It's like where
Yeah.
Where
I
is
mean,
the
'cause there've
line
been
drawn?
kids who've been picked up in other communities, for having a lemonade stand on the corner,
Oh,
because
right,
they
right.
can't.
and what type of permit are they getting from whom?
Yeah.
Right. Are they collecting sales tax on that lemonade?
What's that?
Are they collecting sales tax on the
Yeah,
lemonade?
exactly.
And you said that, other than that, Steve, that's kind of all we.
Well, and you
have,
know,
right?
and what's interesting, solicitor is different than fundraiser. I mean, if you're a nonprofit and you
That's a
are
good point.
collecting, you're the Little League team, you're raising funds, you're not selling to make a commission, you are raising money.
So that's
It's a
not
non-
engaging in business,
So it's not
right?
it is a solicitation, but it's a nonprofit fundraiser versus a sale.
It's not a business transaction.
Right, but I don't know that it's not really differentiated in here.
We need to hear about part 3 of the land development code. Might clear it up.
Right, so fundraising, it's different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if it says you can't sell stuff on a Sunday, so can someone not have a garage sale on a Sunday? Because I know
No, that was in a different
the garage sale's
ordinance.
a different, I know it's a different,
Yeah, this has to do with people going
Coming and
door to
knocking on
door,
your
Right,
door.
not,
right,
not temporary setting up shop.
right.
Does in house to house or street to street
You know, and the other thing, peddler doesn't also refer to people who are candidates who are coming to your door to just talk to you about their candidate, so electioneering, and then we get the Jehovah Witnesses, they're not selling anything, they're not asking me for money, but they're knocking on my door
Right.
and either inviting me to go somewhere, just giving me paperwork, so they're not soliciting per se, they're not asking for money, but
And I
they're
know
coming to my
people-
door.
And I know a certain someone that's been accused of soliciting. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's covered
Right.
somewhere else in terms of kind of a freedom of speech type thing, I guess, but that's what I've been told.
Right, but peddlers and solicitors, the definition doesn't include fundraising or religious, people coming who are not selling. They're still knocking on
Well,
your
if
door.
it's not included, then it's excluded, right? Presumably.
Yeah, well,
Or do we need to have a clear
I mean, if you're raising funds, you're not-
definition of exclusion?
yeah, if you're raising funds, you're not selling anything. If you're asking for votes, you're not selling anything. You're soliciting something.
but would those hours apply to those people as well?
I suppose, I mean, that would be ideal.
Are there other ordinances where this is addressed for non-solicitor type people coming to your door? Is that in another ordinance somewhere?
Not that I'm aware of. This is just for people selling stuff, what we're talking about today. So, and by the way, the reference to the land development code, it's one subparagraph, and it basically is talking about people going from door to door. If you have a business license, you actually have a business in the city of Oldsmar, you're not considered a peddler, which you need a separate permit. This section is saying that if you're going door to door and you're not a person that has a regular business tax receipt or occupational license, you have to get this temporary use permit to go and sell this stuff around the city. So the land development code is of no help to you in answering these questions you have. But this isn't for the purposes of covering people that are running for office or anybody else that is not soliciting. In other words, churches, Jehovah Witnesses, this is not for that, to cover that purpose. This is just selling stuff.
Okay. So yeah, basically because it's not included as peddler, then it's kind of excluded and not covered elsewhere, maybe at all. But that does bring up a valid point, is there some?
Clearly, I have lots of people coming to my door,
So,
because I don't have the big sign, yeah,
Just stand in a line.
constantly.
I'm not selling anything. Well, it's 7:30. It's like, I just want your vote. Again, I didn't see anything else in there. This discussion was great. It is funny that the 2-page ones where it's, well, what about this, well, what about that? But like I said, I thought the hours are too expansive, and I recommend that change. Beyond that, I don't see too many in there.
Do we want to move forward with, accepting that proposed change as part of our recommendations?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
hours
I
adjustment
think
is
9 to
good.
7 is reasonable.
9 to 7, then. We'll write that down. Make sure Tom has it. Okay, so then we will move on to agenda item number 6, discuss chapter 50, secondhand goods, ORC lead member Jared Buckman. And again, Jared is not here. So, did Jared meet with you and discuss this one as well, or was this through someone
Met with
else?
somebody else. I
Okay.
think you met with Marie.
Marie
Don't
says,
they?
yeah.
All right. Oh, yeah, right. Met with Marie.
Recommendations.
Okay, well, does anybody else have discussion items related to this ordinance that they'd like to hit on, or are they okay?
How about his question there, if running a business needs a tax license, et cetera, do we see a conflict with selling goods online? See that at the top of the first page?
Yep.
Well, if you're selling goods online, I don't think that has anything to do with garage sales.
Yeah, me neither.
That's probably, like you said, it would be covered under 5031. It looks like maybe number 2, a sale of short duration, because if you're just posting one specific item in online space and it's not really making any
You
physical
know how
impact.
well the internet is regulated.
Right. I think that's, yeah, part 2 seems like sale of short duration. And obviously, the quicker you sell something, the better you feel about it, and if it's not lingering in an online posting, but, tax license.
Does anybody feel that should be classified under that
Or
section?
should we add an additional section that addresses online sold goods?
I don't know.
I think it's totally
should do it.
different.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to.
I don't see the need to add it.
Yeah, no.
If it came under that, then wouldn't you need the 10-day temporary permit in order to move forward with any online sales? And that doesn't seem like, that doesn't seem
So if I
practical,
go on
right?
Facebook and I advertise my
Right.
bike for sale and somebody comes by my house and buys the bike out of my garage, I
Right.
mean, it's,
I think that's fine.
Well, and really, it's kind of, even though the title of the section is secondhand goods, it's more or less in relation to garage sales,
Right.
right? So it's not the general sale of goods. It's kind of more specifically focused to garage sales. Just about every section calls out garage sale.
Right.
So I don't see any issues with it.
No.
Yeah, I don't need, and like I said, if it was defined as that, and I don't know how many people apply for permits for garage sales. But if you're selling your old washer and dryer online and you need to get a 10-day permit in order to do it, and you'd only be allowed to do it 4 times. Well, what if I decided, okay, I won't sell this at my house today, but I'll meet you at the park, then I don't need a permit for it. Because it's not technically a garage sale. It just seems like you'd have to do a complete overhaul to try to gather that, almost like it needed its own section itself in order to do that. I think this is just, if you want to have some people come over and buy your used stuff, gently used, as Ken said, you need to let us know, and you can only do it 4 times a year. You can't just be running the show out of your garage all year long.
That's probably the kind of the overarching intent with
Right.
trying to regulate garage sales. You don't want somebody just doing it all day, every day in their driveway.
Right, yeah,
It's considered kind of a visual nuisance to
right.
neighbors.
Right.
All right, well, anything else anybody would like to add? Okay. Then we will move on and there we go. So, next sheet. We will go to agenda item number 7, assign chapters for February 3rd, 2020 meeting discussion. So on the next sheet there, we all should have, or actually at the back of the packet, we have our section list and who was assigned so far, what was completed. So any of those sections, it's blank meeting date boxes would be ones open for discussion. And actually, we might as well edit this for Jared's election section, right? We want to move that to the April meeting, or reassign that to April.
And Ann, I think you had said that Dave was ready to talk about taxation.
Yeah, somebody said in his email, I'll be ready next meeting to cover taxes. Oh, boy. That's what it says.
Strike up the band.
Okay,
And
so
I can do the law enforcement one next month.
we got February
Or not next
chapter,
month, it's
chapter 62 for Dave. And then Polly, what was it?
34.
34, okay.
You want to do chapter 2, Andrew, next? Administration?
Administration, okay.
And I can do the advertising.
Well, let's see, so
Chapter
administration's
6.
15 pages, law enforcement's 2, taxation is long, which
39.
I don't know how, if there's a lot. But, and if we assign 3, then that leaves 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, plus the revisiting of elections, 8. So that really then leaves, if we only do 3, then it leaves 8 more. So if you split it 3, 3, 2 or something, that would require us to have March, April, May meetings, or just March and April if we went 4 and 4 for the last, or if we assign a 4th one to the next meeting, you know what I mean? Like, we're kind of at a,
Yeah.
if we don't do 3, we can do
Utilities is
4
quite a
ones.
monster. If you
I mean,
notice.
advertising is small. It's only 2 pages.
Right. Yeah, so it's like, we could, if we want to be go-getters, I'd say we could, by the March meeting, pretty much have everything, at least a first pass at everything. And then that would, what would have been the total, that would be our, first met in October, right? So that's our 6th meeting or 7th? 7th.
Or 4th?
Does that sound right?
We first met October 7th,
October.
so 1,
That would
2,
be
3,
6th.
right, today.
It's 4th, yeah.
Well, we'd certainly need an April meeting because we have to see what the elections hold, correct?
Right, yeah,
Right.
we know we need to at least stretch it to April for kind of revisiting that, but that might be then kind of the ability to where if we do have some stuff to start to review in a report manner,
Right.
and then that would have been, April makes 7. So then you've got 2 more potential meetings to tie it up and be done in 9 months. Which I think is that our original limit, 9? Okay.
So I've got taxation, law enforcement, administration, and then also advertising. Is that what we were?
We did advertising, then that leaves 7 to cover between March and April.
Okay.
Right?
Mhm.
So you do 3 1 month and,
The
Or
utilities
the
is a
other.
monster there, Andrew. See it at the bottom.
right, so we probably want to, I mean, we could try to talk through that, and I don't think we need to slate anything else for now, but that's probably a good one for March, and then April, we know for sure elections will be in there, and a couple others, potentially.
Yeah, 'cause
Or
you still got
just
some
that
meetings.
one and start some summary discussion, review of all the changes. 2, 3, well, you would at least probably have 1 or if not 2 more sections in addition to elections. It'd
Right,
be kind of a briefer meeting maybe.
yeah.
Okay, so Pam, you want to do the advertising one next
For
time?
February?
Okay.
Okay, you got it.
All right, so to review then, we've got chapters slated for next meeting, chapters 2, 6, 34, and 62, with a revisit in April of 22. Everybody good with that? Okay, in that case then, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Adjourn.